To be in exile means being a stranger in a strange land. To lose one's sense of time and place and being. Many people who follow Christ in this current world feel very much that way. A feeling of being kind of in exile. Sort of at home, but in a strange land. Where are we headed? What's our purpose? How do we navigate in a world that just does not seem like home? You know, in Israel's history, there was a time and place when the Jewish people felt very much that way. A time when even foreign conquerors had come in and oppressed them and taken some of them away to other places. They lost their treasured homeland. And the answers to them and the warnings and God's voice in the midst of all of that kind of confusion came to them through these people that we call prophets. Prophets who are messengers of God and to the people. To be a prophet is to speak to the people on God's behalf. And so when today we go to the Old Testament prophetic books and we open them up and we see their writings, we see a message that speaks very much of what is God's character. What's God's character, particularly in times that are difficult and grueling, in times where He is all that we can turn to in trust and hope in a crazy and crazy world. How to live in a time when you're feeling like you're living in exile. So in this 12-week series that we begin called Uncharted Life in Exile, we'll be looking at these prophetic writings and going through to these to some extent and what we may see as kind of some more remote portions of the Scripture, but Scriptures where we see how God is moving and how we ourselves can be moving from faith in what feels like uncharted territory to a faith that's literally off the charts because God is so much in the midst of it. So we're going to go through some more remote scriptures here, and these minor prophets, and we think of the 4 minor or major prophets, 12 minor prophets in the scriptures, and we don't tend to read these books a whole lot apart from a few major passages like Isaiah 53 that really catches our ear, or those Jeremiah passages of God's hopes and plans and so forth for us. And I know what some of you are thinking right now. I know what you're thinking. Oh, man, it's going to be like 12 weeks of these dreary kind of obscure Old Testament passages. It's going to be really academic and Randy and Chris and Tim and their books, and they're just going to drive us nuts with all this, and the Assyrians and the Babylonians and this ites and that ites, and it's just, oh man, this is really going to be, it's not going to be so good. So, okay, so I know some of you are thinking that, right? So what do you want? What do you want? Action? You want adventure? You want something like that? I don't know, like sort of like, I don't know, like maybe Indiana Jones or something. Is that what you expect? Do we have some Indiana Jones? Do you guys have some? Oh, here it is.
For you, Junior.
Yes, sir.
Oh yeah, that's church, man. That's what it should be. Now you're thinking, okay, now what was that about? That was a little bit random, throwing Indiana Jones in there, maybe. Well, probably not. I suspect it might come back a little bit later on this morning somewhere. Well, today we do begin in our study in the Old Testament prophets and life in exile, uncharted by going to the shortest of them all, to Obadiah. So the book of Obadiah, it's a 1-chapter book. It's the shortest book in the Old Testament. Only has 21 verses. Now, when we do this Old Testament stuff, you know, I know a lot of you don't have like that Old Testament history right there in the front of your mind. So we do have to give you a little bit of background here. So we got to sort out the Old Testament prophets a little bit. You know, like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, Daniel, Isaiah, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jeremiah, Nahum, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. You know those guys? Okay? So we got to sort them out. The only way to learn that is like that, okay? You got to, boom, you got to get through it, get it done, all right? So, you want to do it with me? Okay, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentation. Okay, all right. But we're going to go through these books, all right? So we got to sort that out a little bit. And I'll be honest with you. Now, some of this history I'm going to share with you, I do have that kind of like in my head all the time. But like where each of these prophets fit in, I'm maybe about 50-50 on that. So here's a chart. And maybe this will help us sort it, get it sorted out a little bit. Now, when we talk about the Old Testament prophets, we have a few of them that talk about a prophet to, and it says at the top, that black didn't show up so great there. It says to Edom, to the nation of Edom. So we're going to be talking about that today. That's what we're talking about in Obadiah. He's probably the oldest of all these prophets we're going to talk about. And then you see the next one down to Assyria, Jonah and Nahum. They were prophets that were prophesying to that kingdom of Assyria. And then we talk about pre-exilic, exilic, and post-exilic prophets. Now, the exile that we're talking about is the captivity of the Israelites to Babylon. And this happened when Nebuchadnezzar came. Now, the northern tribe of Israel had already been taken away by those Assyrian people on that's on there, okay? That's the 10 northern tribes. The southern 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin, were taken away into captivity by Nebuchadnezzar, some 600 BC, something like that. So that's the exile we're talking about. So prophets that were before that were Hosea and Amos. And then they were to Israel, to the northern 10 tribes. Those guys are gone. The Assyrians take them. Then there's pre-exilic prophets that go to Judah. These are prophets talking to the remnant that continued faithful with God for another 120 some years or so. So those guys, Joel, Isaiah, and all of that. And then there's exilic prophets, and that's what we're talking about when the Jewish people were living in life in Babylon. And, of course, Daniel. We think of Daniel, who went through that whole period of time. So Daniel and Ezekiel are while the exile is going on. And then post-exilic, after they come back to the promised land under Ezra and Nehemiah, prophets for that era of history are Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. Now, what you need to do to remember these things and to sort it out is you need to follow along in our series, so you learn more about it by doing the online thing at unchartedtsf.org. So follow along with it, and tomorrow's devotional, and we'll make it a page that you can go back and refer to on the top bar of where these guys fit in, so that as we're talking through them in the next 12 weeks, you can pop on that little link and you can get it sorted out. And I'll categorize it in a couple of other different ways as well to help you kind of as you navigate through it. And I'll be honest with you, I mean, that's not stuff that's always right up in the front of my mind either. So I'm learning and growing with you in all of that. But we'll have it out there for you. So today we talk about Obadiah. And Obadiah is a prophet to Edom. Now, what is Edom? You can go ahead and drop that off the screen now. What is Edom? Edom is a nation, a people group that descended from Esau. Now, remember the story of Esau? Again, with some of this Old Testament stuff, it helps you to know this basic Old Testament history. Abraham. Abraham had one son. His name was Isaac. Isaac had 2 sons. Their names were Jacob and Esau. Okay. See, it's interesting that you said Jacob and Esau. See, Isaac would have said, my sons are Esau and Jacob, is what he would have said. Because remember what happened there in that story, the story there of about, how Esau was the one who deserved the birthright, but Jacob connived and maneuvered and manipulated along with mom's help, and he ended up getting that. And then he had, of course, the blessing then, and through him came the 12 sons, 12 tribes of Israel. And so that is that background. But you remember the whole story here of Jacob and Esau. And you remember how bitter Esau was about that, about how he was tricked by his brother into selling his birthright, and how actually Isaac was. I mean, Esau wasn't nearly so tricked as Isaac was by the whole scenario. But it's not the stuff that made for happy Thanksgiving dinners in the Isaac family. I mean, you think you got some crazy stuff around the holidays with your family. Imagine you got that going on. It totally blew up the family system. Now, when Jacob 20 years later comes back into the promised land as God had led him, you know that they meet each other, and Esau has prospered, and God has basically blessed him with a large family and all that goes along with the measurement of wealth and the accruing of the things of this world. And so they reconcile, but it never was like family anymore after that. It was always a little weird, So Esau, the family of Esau, become the Edomites. And over time, though God blesses them at the beginning, over time, there's probably no people group in the scriptures that God is like angry with. I mean, like if you're an Orioles fan, who's the evil empire? The Yankees. That's right, okay? If you say, God, who like really annoys you among people groups? He'd say, Edom is what he would say, okay? And so they're always kind of the first one in the boom, getting zapped line of things here. So this is a prophetic book written to them, and yet speaks of Israel, speaks of God's people, and it has timeless lessons for us today. So now, Edom, we'll have that later, okay. Let's go on a little bit more in the setting here. So there's a lot of hostility between Edom and Judah, or Israel, the Jewish people, tracing, of course, all the way back to that scenario. But by Obadiah's day, the argument centered more about trade routes and commerce, and what was called the King's Highway, the caravan routes of trade east and west, and as they would crisscross north and south. Basically what they were always battling with each other about had to do with basically who's got control of the Interstate 70, Interstate 81 corridors and exchange at Hagerstown in Edom. Okay, that's kind of like what you have going on. So they're constantly battling with each other. Well, let's go to the text, to the book of Obadiah, where God prophesies against Edom, the nation of Edom. Here's what it says. And we see, first of all, the destruction of Edom prophesied in the opening third or so of the book here. And we see how the nations are called together to an inevitable destruction of the country. Look at the first 4 verses. It says, the vision of Obadiah. This is what the sovereign Lord says about Edom. We have heard a message from the Lord. An envoy was sent to the nations to say, rise, let us go against her for battle. See, I will make you small among the nations. You will be utterly despised. The pride of your heart has deceived you. You who live in the clefts of the rocks and make your home on the heights. You who say to yourself, who can bring me down to the ground? Though you soar like the eagle and make your nest among the stars, from there I will bring you down. Now, who's he talking to here? God is saying, I'm calling the nations together to a time of judgment. The nations are going to come together. You're going to be wiped out. We're going to see why here in a moment. But when I do that, you're going to be eliminated. You're going to be despised. You're going to be just kind of basically wiped off the earth. Now, he's saying to them, you need to understand that it's the pride, your own pride, that has brought you to this problem. You think you're big stuff. You think you really live in an impenetrable place where you have your habitation. You think you cannot be defeated by anybody coming against you. Well, I'm God, and we're coming. I'm calling the nations together, and you are going to get wiped out. And of course, the Edomites would laugh at this because they believed they lived in the most impregnable place that they could imagine. Here are some pictures of it. We're going to go through several pictures here, okay? Their fortress was like in this giant bowl in the mountains, and they are carved into the rocks. So it says here, you who live in the cleft of the rocks. This is a place in modern-day Jordan called Petra. And these are some of the buildings that are carved into the mountainside. And you may have seen some of these in a movie before, like maybe at the end of Indiana Jones movie. So there's kind of where the city was, in this mountainous place. And there was only one way in and out of the city, right there. One more picture of it. And right there. Now, where'd you see that before? You saw it in the film just a few minutes ago. That's where Indiana Jones and his father and whatever that other character was, they're riding out through that. That's the only way in and out. I mean, imagine from times of antiquity where you can't go overhead in an airplane and drop a bomb on someone. You had to come from the ground. The only way into the city was here. You can see why they would have a lot of pride about where they lived. Here it is on a map And just to kind of show you where that is. So to get you oriented, you see Israel there to the left. You see Jerusalem to the left center. And then I put the red arrow there that points to a place called Petra. So you see Egypt is just there to the west a little bit, Saudi Arabia to the right. That darker colored area is modern day Jordan. So it's south of the Dead Sea, south of Israel, in a place it's kind of remote, but boy, what a place to have as a spot. You can see how the trade routes would have to pass through there, going from Mesopotamia and that area over to Egypt and so on. You can see why it is a crossroads and kind of place, and why they would be people who were filled with pride about where they lived and the place they occupied on the earth. Going on, we see Edom's riches will be totally plundered in the prophecy here. Verse 5, if thieves come to you, if robbers in the night, oh, what a disaster awaits you. Would they not steal only as much as they wanted? If grape pickers came to you, would they not leave a few grapes? But how Esau will be ransacked, his hidden treasures and pillage. It's basically saying if somebody comes in and robs you at night, they're not going to take absolutely everything. They're going to take what they want. They're going to take the stuff of value. Even when you go and you pick the grapes, you pick the good ones, but at least there's something still there. There's some remnant that's there. It's not even going to be that. The wipeout is going to be so complete that it is completely gone. Verse 7, we see how it's by former friends who fool them. All your allies will force you to the border. Your friends will deceive and overpower you. Those who eat your bread will set a trap for you, but you will not detect it. And so it was in the course of time in history that the Nabateans, caravan drivers, whom the Edomites had trusted and traded with over the years, were very instrumental as business partners, but instrumental as well in coming into the city and turning against the Edomites and leading a horde of varied nations that conquered them over a period of many years. The wise and mighty of Edom would be slaughtered, verses 8 and 9. In that day, declares the Lord, will I not destroy the wise men of Edom, those of understanding, in the mountains of Esau? And apparently that's the way it happened, is that the ruling classes were caught first and captured and slaughtered first. It says your warriors, Teman, that would be a city of that area, will be terrified, and everyone in Esau's mountains will be cut down in the slaughter. Why is God so angry? Why is he bringing this upon these people? Well, we see that now in verses 10 to 14. So we've seen that God has made this prophecy. Why has he made this prophecy? What is the cause for this destruction? And the first thing we see in verse 10 is because of violence that was done by the Edomites against their brother Jacob and the Israelites. It says, because of the violence against your brother Jacob, you will be covered with shame. You will be destroyed. And look again, verse 11, sort of an indifference we see here. So we see violence, we see indifference in verse 11. On the day you stood aloof, while strangers carried off his wealth and foreigners entered into his gates and cast lots for Jerusalem, you were like one of them. So this would be talking about Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians when they came in, and they came in at three different times, 605 BC, 597 BC, 586 BC, three different times Nebuchadnezzar came and walloped Jerusalem and took more and more of the Jewish people away to captivity back to Babylon, and including folks like Daniel. Folks like Ezekiel were part of those who were carried away. That's why we call them the exilic prophets. And so, while this was going on, Edom is there watching this. They're not lifting a hand to defend their former relatives, their family, their distant cousins. They're not doing anything to help at all, but they're watching it happen and being indifferent to it. And not only just being indifferent, we see verse 12, that they rejoiced over it. You should not gloat over your brother in the day of his misfortune, nor rejoice over the people of Judah in the day of their destruction, nor boast so much in the day of their trouble. You know, it's kind of like they were sitting watching this and saying, oh, it's good, you know. It took a while. It took a few hundred years for sure, but, you know, old Jacob got what was coming to him. He's tasting his own medicine now, you know. But not only that, verses 13 and 14, you see that they were partners, actually, in it. So you see that as we go through it, there's increasing guilt. It says, you should not march through the gates of my people in the day of their disaster, nor gloat over them in their calamity in the day of their disaster, nor seize their wealth in the day of their disaster, all things that they did as partners with it. You should not wait at the crossroads to cut down their fugitives, nor hand over their survivors in the day of trouble. So, God has a problem with the Edomites and with the descendants of Esau. So we see the prophetic disaster predicted that will come upon them. We see the reasons for it because of their rebellion against God. And of course, not in this prophecy, but a whole part of who they were as a people. As these were not worshipers of the true God. They had gone in idolatrous directions, as had all the other nations around at the time. But we see a big change, as you always see in the prophets. You see the destruction, you see the reasons for it, as God makes his case. But always in the prophets, you hear the prophetic voice coming and saying, this is bad, this is awful times are happening, this is what's going on, this is why, but here's where we're going. And here is where the day of the Lord comes in, and here is where God is seen in it. So we'll see judgment, yes, but restoration as well. Starting in verse 15, it says, the day of the Lord is near for all nations. Not just for Edom, but for all nations. As you have done, it will be done to you. Your deeds will return upon your own head. Just as you drank on my holy hill, so all the nations will drink continually. They will drink and be as if they had never been. So God is saying that a day is coming. A time is coming when all the nations will be judged in terms of the Lord's judgment and righteousness. Now, I want to show you a little stick figure chart kind of thing here. I've used this several times over the years to talk about what it was like for a prophet. So you have a lower hill and you have a farther hill away. In the Old Testament prophets, we're going to see this over and over again. We're going to see the Old Testament prophet talking about something that has fulfillments that happen at two different times. There's an immediate, short-term, nearer fulfillment that, from our perspective, will have been something that's already happened in history. But the prophet is unable, from his viewpoint, to see that there is that valley in between to the far fulfillment. And so throughout prophetic scriptures, remember this, as we go through this series, that you'll over and over see this dynamic of a prophet talking about something that has historical reference that from our point of view has already happened. But it also is anticipating what is yet even future for us, of a final day of judgment, of God's final judgment upon the earth that is yet to come. And it's often called the day of the Lord, the day of the Lord. And here's where we go on in the scriptures about how Jacob will be restored, how the kingdom will be established again. It says, but on Mount Zion will be deliverance. It will be holy, and Jacob will possess his inheritance. Jacob will be a fire, and Joseph a flame. Esau will be a stubble, and they will set him on fire and destroy him. There will be no survivors from Esau. The Lord has spoken. People from the Negev, and it's going to talk about surrounding areas in that area of the ancient world, will occupy the mountains of Esau. People from the foothills will possess the land of the Philistines. That would be all along the Mediterranean coast there to the west of where Petra was on that map. They will occupy the fields of Ephraim, and Samaria and Benjamin will possess Gilead. This company of Israelite exiles who are in Canaan will possess the land as far as Zarephath. The exiles from Jerusalem who are in the Shepharah will possess the towns of the Negev. And deliverers will go up on Mount Zion to govern the mountains of Esau, and the kingdom will be the Lord's. And so we see that it's talking about how, yes, in the short term, Edom, Esau would be destroyed as the people would come back from exile and Israel would again occupy that land. They would occupy much of that territory. But yet the final day of the Lord and the final promises that we believe will still yet literally be fulfilled as God has promised them are still yet to be fulfilled for Israel, where God will come and rule as a king. We believe that future time is coming. And that's the stuff of other studies and other times in the whole area, what we call eschatology or things of the last times. But yet we see that happening. We see Israel back again as a land, and we anticipate that all of these promises will yet be fulfilled in a second coming of Christ and all the events that surround and lead up to that. So you see the near-term things, you see the far-term things. But points are to be made out of this. Let me make 4 things quickly as we wrap up today. As we would apply this truth to us, because all Scripture is applicable to us. We see timeless truths in all of it. And as we go into the series, kind of what I'm going to give you here in 4 points here will be in varied ways much of what we see throughout this series. We'll see, first of all, that the world is in a mess because of sin. We know that the world is a mess because of sin. Evil is at the heart of all that is contentious in the world and all the strife and the struggles that happen in our world today. Ultimately, it is because of sin. And at the heart of sin, as a second point to make, is we know that at the heart of sin is the whole issue of pride. It was that way in the beginning. We think back to the very inception of sin into the human condition. Or you think back even before that, where rebellion first raised itself against God and Satan. What did Satan say? I will be like God. I will be like the Most High. In those passages that talk about Satan's rebellion against God, you see his arrogance and his pride. And what sin is, as it comes into the human condition as well, is a pride of arrogance, of independence. Has God really said you're not to do this? Well, God's holding back on you, and you're not getting all that you should get. You should assert yourself. You should step forward. And so sin comes into the human condition, and it comes down to us today. And so it's an arrogance of independence and a denial of God's goodness and faithfulness. So there is sin. Sin is rooted in pride. And the third thing to say is that in the current context of time, injustice, therefore, often is what prevails. Injustice often prevails in our world today because of sin. Not everything is just and right. It seems to prevail more and more. And I believe that it's kind of a natural condition, of aging, that you see this more and more. But I believe it is true that the world is not a place that's getting better. The Scriptures didn't say it would. It is a place where evil abounds more and more, and we sense that, and we feel that more and more. And as the years go by, you become more profoundly aware of that and of the disappointment that this world never truly, really satisfies. And so you get a growing discontent, it seems, with this world and the direction that it's going. Because man's systems will always fail. Even the best of systems will fail because all of them are inhabited by and led by, and the component element of all systems is sinful mankind. And so it will always disappoint. There will be an injustice that very often prevails in a fallen world. But then there's a fourth and final point, is that there is an inevitable day of judgment where God's wrath does come out upon the proud and the evil, but his grace abounds to those who are humble and those who trust in him. And so this first sermon in the series is called, It Will Never Happen to Me. And that's kind of picking up on Edom's attitude. We live up here in the mountains and the rocks. Nothing can get to us. You can't touch us. We're fine. We're good where we are here. We're self-sufficient. God, nothing's going to harm us here. We're in good shape. And it will never happen to me, is what they said. And we may take that attitude. We know that many of the people of the world and take that attitude in a denial of God and of his authority in their lives. In today's world, we've kind of come to measure ourselves very much by individuals' standards. It's easy to justify behavior or to hide it from other people. We flee accountability, and we cease to believe that we'll be held accountable by any standard. That's kind of where the world is. You can do what you want. There's no standard, but there is, and it will happen to us. We can't say it won't ever happen to me. It will happen to us. We are accountable creatures of a creator God who is righteous and just. And in the world of faith and religion, we see God as a God of love. Not so much as a God of judgment. But the Scriptures teach us that God is violently angry with sin. His ferocious holiness is such that anything that falls short of that perfect standard is destined for destruction. But the gospel is more radical and awesome than that. The gospel says that because of God's fierce anger, he demands blood. But because of God's intense love, God offers his own. Excuse me. The final part of Obadiah is therefore a timeless message of hope. You know, if you feel disconnected from God, perhaps it's because you haven't fully grasped this gospel message for yourself yet and applied it to yourself and to your life. And you are that kind of independent person in the world who will not come to God, who will not yield, who will not come in faith and say, I am a sinner and I need you, God. I need your grace. I need you to forgive me. I need you to adopt me into your family. And so today, at the beginning of a new year, what better time than to stop running from God and to come to him and say, I want you. I want to trust in you. I want to be one of your own and humble myself to you as my God. And to those of you who've known God for a long time, it's easy for us, even in the midst of that, to get to this point where we do see ourselves as rather independent of God and of his word and of his standards, and thinking that we are pretty much in charge of things and being disappointed when he doesn't deliver on schedules that we think he should. And perhaps, again, we need to do, as it says in the book of James, is to focus on how to live in light of the gospel. He gives more grace, it says. Therefore, it says, God opposes the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. Submit yourselves, therefore, to God. Resist the devil. He will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. So we need to humble ourselves, to yield to him in obedience and trust. And that's often difficult to do in a confusing world. But remembering that we're in the midst of a time that is passing, of a world that is really fading away. And what better time than at the beginning of a year to again come to God and say, I want to renew my commitment to you. I want to become again a person who's yielded to you, to follow you in humble fashion, to trust you and to wait for your leading and your timing in my life. And I'm doing too much driving here, Lord. I want you to do that driving for me, and I want to trust and yield to you today. So I think that's a timeless message for us as we go into the prophetic books, and I trust that you'll benefit greatly from them. And let's pray for our experience as we do that. Father, we thank you that we're not left alone. It really is a crazy world. It is a world in which sin has been established. The pride of the original sin, it descends down to us today. And Father, the injustice that we see around us in so many ways is because of this fallen world in which we live. Help us, God, not to put our hope in that. Help us to trust in you. For some, for the first time, for others to be renewed in their trust and their faith. That even in the midst of a world in which we feel like an exile, a world that's the charts don't seem to go the direction one would expect. It seems to be uncharted and alien territory in which we live. God, help us not to put our hopes in that and understanding it, but to put our hopes and to invest our time in the stuff that is the stuff of eternity. And as we seek to do that together this year, as a family, as a people, as a community in this broader community, I pray that you would bless us with an incredibly fantastic year of reaching out, touching people's lives we've never touched before, of people who need to come and to yield as well to following Christ. And so help us to do that. Help us to be those people today and in this year ahead. And we'll give you the thanks for that in Jesus' name. Amen.